Alrighty, cherubs. So now that we've talked about the Romanesque and now that we've talked about the Gothic, I want to just have a little brief discussion about how they compare and contrast. What do they look like standing next to each other? And how do we find examples of those in our city? Okay. Now, we're not going to find pure examples of the Gothic and pure examples of the Romanesque in Utah because these are medieval styles. Okay, they're going to grow up in medieval Europe. In Utah, we don't have those, and so in Utah only goes back. Our history only goes back into the 1860s, and so we need to look for later examples, and they're not going to be pure. So we're going to take a look at the examples that we can find downtown and how they've changed and what elements they contain of each. All right. So just by way of reminder, Gothic architecture looks like this. It's intended to be taller. It has, remember, Lux Nova. The whole point is that Lux Nova. We've got a taller structure. They've got pointed arches to make it taller. We've got rib vaults to make it taller. We've got flying buttresses to make it taller. It's also going to be more ornate, more heavily decorated. So it's going to have these little pinnacles, these little spires all over the outside. Also look for a rose window. And the stone is going to be smoother. Whereas the Romanesque, it's intended to be shorter because they didn't have the technology yet to make it taller. So it is going to be shorter. It's going to have rounded arches, Roman arches, Romanesque. It's going to have groin and barrel vaults. It's going to be less ornate. We're not going to have a stained glass in a pure Romanesque building, okay? The buttresses are going to be attached. They're not going to be flying away. And the stone is not going to be smooth. It's going to be rusticated, which means that it's really rough and earthy looking. So the timeline for architecture looks something like this. We've got the classical, let me grab my pointer. We've got the classical world of the Greeks and the Romans, okay? And everyone's going to be looking back to that. Now, remember, we've got the emotional and intellectual dichotomy here, and that's going to be coming into play. So we have the Greeks and the Romans, okay? They're going to be intellectual until they get really big and really crazy, then they're emotional. Now, in the medieval period, we're going to have the Romanesque, which again is making art to a formula. They're trying to be like the Romans, so it's intellectual. Whereas the Gothic is meant to overwhelm you and be huge. In the Renaissance, we're going to go back to the classical style, back to intellectual. So intellectual, emotional, intellectual, emotional, intellectual. Then when the Renaissance is over, we're going to head into the Baroque. And that's when things get wild and over the top and big and emotional again. So in the 1600s, it's going to get really big and wild again. 1700s, we're back to the neoclassical, we're back to the Renaissance, we're back to the Greeks and the Romans. So intellectual again. Now, the Romantic in the 1800s, that's where we're going to be seeing Neo-gothic. There is no Romantic style of architecture. It's just going to redux everything that's come before it that wasn't classical. So it's going to be the Neo-gothic, the Neo-baroque, the Neo-romanesque. It's the everything that's come before it that's not classical. Okay? And again, with the intention of revisiting the past and making it look cool. So that takes us to Salt Lake City, and that takes us to our architecture. So again, the pieces that we're going to be seeing are not they're not pure forms of Gothic and Romanesque. Because they were made in the 1800s, early 1900s, they're going to be neo. So they're not going to be pure. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. So our first example is the Mormon Temple that is in downtown Salt Lake City. Now you can see, now I've paired it with a cathedral here, a Gothic cathedral in Germany, and hopefully you can see the similarities. Okay, it's tall. It's got the pinnacles. All right. It's meant to be awe-inspiring. It's got, again, the heavy ornamentation. The smooth stone. Okay, so these are the elements that they're pulling from it. So that's why the temple is Neo-gothic. Okay? Now, there are elements, and you can see, but Mr. Epperly, it has attached buttresses. Yes, it does. And it has rounded arches instead of pointed. Yes, you're absolutely correct. But the overall look is Gothic. And that's what they were going for. And I'll tell you why. We'll get to it here in a second, why they were doing that. So the profile is Gothic. That's why it's Neo-Gothic, okay? Because it's not a pure Gothic building. We don't have the flying buttresses. We don't have the pointed arches. We don't have the rose window. But the overall look that they're going for is Gothic, ergo Neo-Gothic. Okay, so here's another Gothic cathedral. This one's in Milan. You can see the heavy, the facade. And you see the similarities. So look at how it recalls, it harkens back to these old Gothic cathedrals, the pinnacles, the front. It's so similar, okay, with its five parts. Again, it's purposefully harkening back to these Gothic cathedrals, all right? Now, here is the Catholic cathedral in Salt Lake City, and this is the Cathedral of the Madeleine. Hopefully you can see the similarities and the differences. Okay, so this one obviously looks this one's a little more boxy. This one is cruciform. Okay, this one's rectangular. This one is shaped like a cross. Instantly, you can see a giant westwork. Okay, we can see a transept. We can see a tower over the crossing. You can see rose windows. Okay, all right. But the overall look, I mean, you're saying, like, what, Mr. Woody? Okay, there are some pointed arches, but most of the arches here are rounded. All right. It does not have flying buttresses, and the stonework is heavily rusticated. Okay, and the windows throughout are pretty small. Okay, it does have some gorgeous stained glass windows, but they're not larger than life. They're not the biggest stained glass windows you can possibly imagine, and that's kind of the point, because the Cathedral of the Madeleine is Neo-Romanesque. Again, look at that heavy rusticated stone and the plethora of rounded Roman arches. And again, the profile, it looks very much like the Church of Saint Foy. Okay. With, again, the tower's it's not going for height here. It's not going for height. And that's why it's Neo-Romanesque. So I hope that you can see, while it does, again, contain some elements, the rose window, the stained glass of the Gothic, it does have some pinnacles, okay, but it's Neo-Romanesque versus the Neo-Gothic. Now, the Cathedral of the Madeleine is one of my favorite places to go in the city. It is just stunning, okay? It is up in the avenues. It's built onto this hill. It was built in the early 20th century. Here you can see the apse at the back, the transept, again, the crossing tower, attached buttresses, stained glass windows, westwork. The portal, we'll take a look at the portal here in just a second. Here's the floor plan of the church. Now, the floor plan will give you kind of, again, a sense of, it is very typical of cathedral architecture. So you can see here we've got the nave, and they do have seats, okay? We do have our side aisles. We do have a transept. We do have the crossing, and the altar is placed at the crossing. That doesn't always happen in a cathedral. But in this case, the Cathedral of Madeleine, the altar is at the crossing. Okay? We have got this octagonal-shaped baptismal font back here. All right, when you first walk into the building, there it is, the baptismal font, and it's octagonal shaped for the reasons that we talked about previously. The front is the westwork, and within that is the narthex, okay, the foyer. And in the foyer, you look up and you see he's got these great groin vaults sitting there. Very cool. The apse is back here. And the reliquary, there is a reliquary here, and that's going to be back here at the end of the apse. Okay. Off here to the sides, we've got our radiating chapels. Okay. So it has all the components of a classic Romanesque church. Now, out here on the number 3s, these little sticky outies right here, these are the attached buttresses. All right. It does have a portal with archivolts and a tympanum. All right. It has Christ enthroned. Christ. He's not enthroned. He's standing. Excuse me. But he is standing on the globe. He's standing on the world, and he's surrounded by angels who are holding Christograms, the Alpha and Omega, and the JHS, which are the first 3 letters of Jesus in Greek. We've got the 12 apostles. We've got the church doctors. And we have the gospel writers. Okay. So this is the tympanum of the church, the Cathedral of the Madeleine. Very, very cool bas-relief sculpture. We do have the attached buttresses, aforementioned. Now, go ahead. I do want you to go ahead and watch this down below. This is going to give you I just happened to be there when the organist was practicing the one day and recorded him playing. So you can just hear the sound of the organ. And the organ it's nestled just below the rose window, just above the narthex. Okay. And so when I pan around in the camera, you can see where the organ sits. It's just gorgeous sound. Just very beautiful. The reliquary, okay, is here. It's this beautiful casket, and it holds in it. Okay, now you can see here what the relic is at the Cathedral of the Madeleine is a sliver, a very tiny, microscopic, very, very, very small, not microscopic, but very small sliver of the true cross. Okay, so that's the relic that is housed at the cross of Jesus at the Cathedral of the Madeleine. Again, there's another clip. You can see, again, how it's richly decorated. It's richly, richly painted because it's got that the idea that it's sacred on the inside, secular on the outside. Okay, you can see the crossing here. You can see the altar, the choir is behind in the apse, and that's again where the reliquary is. And over here are our chapels and the stained glass window. As you move around, so you walk into the church proper, you leave the narthex, and you look up to your left. That's the story on the stained glass. It's going to have the story of the life of Christ, and it starts with the Annunciation, Gabriel visiting Mary. And then it moves around the stained glass, the story of the life of Christ. It goes through the visitation with Elizabeth, the nativity, his baptism, etc. And it's going to move around, and it's going to go into the stained glass windows, the rose window here in the transept, and then around the back. And then you get the crucifixion at the back in the apse, the resurrection, more resurrection, and then it's going to come over here and then finish out the life of Christ with and the life of Mary. So up into the ascension of Christ, and then the rest of the life of Mary. So it's this really beautiful pictorial, complete visual story. It's just gorgeous moment. Now, the city-county building is also Neo-Romanesque. And you may have seen this downtown. This is where the Arts Festival is every year. And when I drive down, I always think it looks like Hogwarts. But you can see that it's got, again, that heavy rusticated stone. It's got these mansard roofs, which are not Romanesque, but again, that's why it's Neo-Romanesque. It does have the roundy round Roman arches. It does have a tympanum. It does have a portal. Okay. Now this is a secular building. This building is not. It's a government building, but there's a very specific reason why they did it in the Neo-Romanesque, and they do have gargoyles. Okay, so the Cathedral of the Madeleine does have gargoyles attached on the westwork, and the city county building does have these things, which are called grotesques. They're not true gargoyles. Okay, well, this isn't a true gargoyle either, and we'll talk about why right now. The gargoyle, okay, it's related to the Spanish word for throat, garganta, la garganta, okay? A garganta is a throat. What a gargoyle does is it channels, it's a rain spout. That's what it's supposed to do. It channels water out of its throat away from the building. That's a gargoyle. If it's a decorative statue, okay, that's a grotesque. That's a grotesque. So technically, all of them are grotesques because none of them channel water. But these ones do stick out, so we call them gargoyles, even though they're not technically gargoyles. But these ones in the city county building, again, grotesques. And if I go back here, you can see there's more like faces carved, more grotesque. It's a really, really cool building if you get the chance to go and see it. Okay, but again, look at that roundy round. So good, so Romanesque. Okay. Now, again, here is the Mormon Temple, which, again, we've talked about this, is designed to be an axis mundi, and it's Neo-Gothic. It's going for the height. That was the point. It's got the pinnacles. It's got the 5-part front, like the Cathedral of Milan. Okay? And on the inside, now this is a cutaway model of the inside where it has different rooms and that have different functions. Okay, so it does not have a classic cathedral design on the inside already. So just FYI, it does not look. There's no nave. There's no transept. There's no anything like that. It's just different rooms with different functions that you can read about. Okay, so why Neo-Gothic? What were they doing? Why were they doing this? Why did when the Mormons got here, what were they thinking? Okay, why did they go Neo-Gothic? Well, okay. The United States, when it was founded in the 1700s. The style in vogue in England and in Europe at the time was the neoclassical. Okay, so you're going to be getting buildings that look like this, where you have them in the Supreme Court, where they look like Greco-Roman buildings. Okay. Capitol building, again, neoclassical. The Mormons were kicked out of the United States. They left the United States to what at the time was Mexico. And so when they got to Utah, the prevailing style in the United States for big architecture, monumental architecture, was neoclassical. Again, they got kicked out of the U.S. They went to a different country. And so when they started to build their monument, their big monumental architecture, what they did in essence was to say to the United States, we're not you. Okay, so our big building is not going to be neoclassical. It's going to be the opposite. It's going to be neo-Gothic. Okay, so yeah. That and the fact that the Gothic always has had strong connotations for religiosity. Okay, it has these religious connotations. So combine that with the fact that they're absolutely saying, we're not, you kicked us out, fine, that's cool, then we're not part of you. So later they do become part of the United States, and here we have the Neo-Gothic building, a testament in stone. Oh, ha ha ha. When the Catholics show up to Utah, They, again, want to make their big building, and they don't want to make it very, well, again, the Gothic, again, holds very religious connotations, but they don't want to visually align themselves with the Mormons. They wanted to say, hey, we're different than the Mormons. We're not them. So they're going to make their building Neo-Romanesque. And when the city decides to build a large monumental building to say, okay, this is our city hall, they wanted to say very clearly also, hey, okay, we're not all Mormons. Okay. So we're going to, like, the Mormon church doesn't own us. So that's why they built the city county building also Neo-Romanesque. Okay. I'm not making this up. This is a thing. This is real. These are the real reasons behind this. But kind of interesting that architecture, we've seen these architectural, like, visual battles play out, the ideological battles play out in architecture in our own city. It's kind of this fun little twist that we have, the curiosity of history here in our own city. All right, so that is it. That is the Romanesque and the Gothic here in Salt Lake City. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip, and I'm going to link this down below. They're going to talk about the angels in the cathedral. So there it is. Thank you for playing.